please, for the love of God, everyone in the sound of my voice, stop doing sets of 5 all the way up to your 5-rep max. Please, I beg of you.
It's really helpful a lot of the time to like get out of their own head if they can do something that is under a lot of pressure in terms of like time constraint, where they don't have time to sit here and look at their barbell and think about how they could miss 6 different ways before they actually go to make the attempt.
I like to keep my warm-ups very standard for Olympic lifting. Thermal warm-up, getting some stretching in, mobility stuff, and then going into more sport-specific movement prep. If I know I'm feeling good, it's probably like, all right, today's going to be a day this bar is going to move fast, but my hips are super tight or something of that sort. That's where I'll tailor what I'm going to do on that day.
The Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com.
All right, so today we're going to talk about basically building to a max, how you can do that most efficiently and effectively, where you have your best shot of hopefully getting a new rep max or 1 rep max. And so basically we're going to talk about slower lifts versus faster lifts. There's something like deadlift versus a snatch, more technical versus less technical lifts, how that might vary, what could be some principles to follow, as well as like tips and tricks of stuff that has worked well for us and our experience with the CrossFit athletes or GPP people that we work with. And then if we got time, we'll probably go into differences between rep maxes and 1 rep max. So 1 lift versus multiple lifts in a maximal set. And then if we really have time, we might get into, body weight rep maxes versus weightlifting rep maxes. So like, again, something like a strict press rep max versus a strict handstand push-up rep max, along those lines. So starting off, let's just think about some good principles to follow just from a warm-up and preparatory standpoint. What comes to your mind as to like just good fundamental things that people can rely on?
One of the first things I think of is like a thermal warm-up, right? So a lot of people will go into like straight like mobility exercises and all that. And if your body temperature isn't up there, it's not going to feel as right. So just starting off with something super light, would be easy, 3 to 5 minutes on any type of erg, and just having that, always starting off with that, just getting that body temperature up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I kind of look at it and try to break it down and warm up generally, just like Day said. She used a way smarter word than I did. She said thermogenic warm up. I would have said like get like a sweat going a little bit. So something like that to get a sweat going, loosen the joints, get your joints grooved a little bit. Then I look at if you're tight in certain areas, opening up those areas. So maybe some active stretching, activation work. So what muscle groups are going to be the most important? Make sure those are awake and on, and then specific warm up. So very specific to the movements you're going to be doing. So that's kind of the progression I usually follow when looking at a warm up.
So Chris, let's say you're going to snatch to a max. And you're probably a good example of this is someone who like you're not built super well for weightlifting, so you should probably spend a little bit of additional time working on like positions and like prep for those positions. So like again, if you were going to walk out on the floor and max today and you had like endless time to warm up in theory, right? Would you do a decent amount of like static stretching and opening up those joints, or would you do all of it like active, or how would you do that so you're feeling your best?
Yeah, I would say most of it would be, I personally, for and to use your example specifically, a snatch, I would do some stretching, but it would be active. And what I mean by that is like a stretch I really like to do, and I'll do the best I can explain it. I call it like a foam roller overhead squat stretch, where you take a foam roller, you put it in between your shoulder blades, like laying on your back, and you reach for a barbell. And then just kind of, while keeping your core tight, sag your hips towards the floor to kind of get some extension through your thoracic spine. Some would say that's a static stretch, and I guess it kind of is, but I have to stay active in keeping my core tight and moving through that range of motion. So it's not like your standard like figure four hamstring stretch, right? So I might do some of that. I might do some band distracted hip mobilization, depending on how I feel. But outside of that, I found that for me specifically, active, we'll call it active mobility or active stretching tends to help the most. But again, some of it will be dictated upon how I feel from the day's training previously.
Yeah, makes sense. Day, do you want to chime in at all? If I was giving you that same sort of scenario, how would you attack it?
Yeah, with me, like I like to keep my warm-ups very standard for Olympic lifting. So it's very routine. So if I'm doing a snatch, I know exactly what I'm doing each time. And I use the same progression that Chris mentioned, like thermal warm-up, getting some stretching in, mobility stuff, and then going into more like sport-specific movement prep work. And so with that, like if I know I'm snatching or cleaning and jerking, I usually do the same type of routine before. And that allows me to see like how I'm feeling that day too. If I know I'm feeling good, it's probably like, all right, like today's gonna be a day this bar is gonna move fast. It's gonna be a good day. But let's say it's feeling really crappy, like my hips are super tight, my overhead position is super tight or something of that sort. And then when I go into the movement prep, right, if I do like a complex or something like that, and I see the bars moving slow, that's where I'll kind of tailor what I'm gonna do on that day. So that's like how I like to approach it, but very routine. I know where I'm tight usually. Like I usually have very tight hips. My like ankle and thoracic mobility are pretty good, so I don't focus too much on that, just the standard stuff. But I place a lot of focus on my hips because that's where my tightness comes from. So, yeah, just routine for me is key.
Yeah. So all the same principles would apply, but let's then take that scenario to a deadlift. Again, for now, we're just talking about like warm up and movement prep. We'll get to what our building sets and stuff will actually look like. Chris, what would it look like difference wise between like a snatch and a deadlift?
So like to use those two movements specifically, I personally would do less joint mobilization because the demands of a snatch in that regard are way higher than a deadlift, right? And so I would probably do I'll say similar amounts of muscle activation, probably still a little bit more in the snatch because again, to really be dumbed down, you're asking more of, different muscle groups, we'll just say. But yeah, the vast majority of what I would do for a deadlift is like trying to like really feel explosive, really feel dialed in central nervous wise, and then just making sure like Day says, solid thermogenic warm up. So I'm feeling real thermal and ready to go. But yeah, I would say in that regard, less general, there's less general warm up that could go into it. But for me specifically, much less like joint mobilization that would go into that.
Yeah. So for me, I would totally agree. I mean, what I would do for something like snatch is exactly what you guys said. And like today for what Day mentioned, like I do a very similar thing where it's like I know which areas I'm tight and like what specific things help me feel good. So I just go to those things right away and kind of shotgun my way through that and take care of as much as I can and sort of use the empty bar as sort of a check-in to see like how I'm feeling. So like I'll do a few snatches or maybe a few snatch balances or something just to see how that position actually feels. And like when I feel like I can hit that position like full speed and like exactly where I want to be, it's like I'm done with that. Like I don't touch it anymore. And some days that might take me 10 minutes to get there, and some days that might take me 30 minutes to get there. And like being okay with like however long that takes. But then like at that point, like sort of changing from like I'm in warm up mode now to now I am now making like jumps and practicing like getting the nervous system ready and sort of ramping up to actually make solid attempts. And yeah, for something like a deadlift, that process is usually like 5 minutes and not 25 minutes. It's like I moved around a little bit. Okay. I did like, 3 rounds of like 5 exercises and I'm like, man, I just want to lift. And then I'll just like go empty bar, 135, 225, 315, just keep building like pretty aggressively. Whereas snatch, I'll take way more building sets. Day, let's like go now towards like building sets as we're sort of like walking our way towards actually making attempts. how do you think about building attempts? Again, if we just stick with snatch versus deadlift, like how do you think about that?
Yeah. I think with doing like a deadlift, well, I'll start off with the deadlift. It's, like you mentioned, like the prep for it is a lot easier, a lot more straightforward. If you feel tight in certain areas, it's really not going to affect the lift as much as it would for a snatch. And that's so I keep also the warm-up sets for deadlift pretty standard. Like I'm confident I'm going to hit this weight. That's going to be my goal weight. So I'm going to build up this way. Versus when it's snatches, I kind of do a little bit more modified, where I'll have like warm-up sets, empty barbell, right? I like to pair my warm-up sets with some type of like box jumps, like seated box jumps or something like that, just to get on that activation going and get my CNS prepped. But I'll build based on how I feel that day. So I had this goal weight, but I'm going to build based on that, kind of keep percentages in mind, like maybe 40 to 55% will be the range for this set and go from there based on speed. Because a lot of times, like you mentioned with your warm up, like sometimes it takes 5 minutes, sometimes it'll take 30 minutes. And that's how like building to those sets feel with like the snatch. Like some days I could build up to a heavy set in 4 sets, and sometimes it's going to take 8. Where deadlift, it's pretty standard. Like if the barbell doesn't move fast, it's okay. I can still pull the weight versus if the barbell doesn't move fast for a snatch, it's going to be a fail. So keeping that in mind. So with the snatch is where I kind of have a goal, but kind of have variability in the warm-up sets versus deadlift. It's pretty standard as you start with like a higher rep at like 50-ish%, 50 to 60, kind of go down from there. So it's usually I take the approach of like 6, 4, 2 reps, and then based on that, how that feels, either add a set or go into a 1 rep max of 10.
So I think I agree with a lot of that. I think so. If I was to look at a deadlift, let me back up. Regardless of the lift, I don't know about you guys, and maybe you can chime in this. I always like to start with like the barbell first. And I think you both kind of mentioned that. It's not like with the deadlift, right? You might see some people do their general warm up and then immediately throw 135 on. I kind of like to do a couple deadlifts with just the barbell, just to move through the position. Then I'll throw 135 on. I've also found that with any lift, and I know Day kind of talked about, getting to, an idea of what she wants to hit that day. I found that like, and maybe you guys should speak to this as well. There's always, I like to call barrier weight, right? Like this weight that you're like, if I can hit this, like, I know I'm feeling good today. Like for me, maybe not so much now, but for me, that was like a 185 snatch, which is 90% of my max. I'm like, okay, if I'm grooving up to 185, like today's going to be a good day. If I'm like saving 185 or like missing it, it's like, we're probably not going to have a great day today, right? And so I found that kind of building towards that is a good marker in pretty decent chunks. So like for the deadlift, I like to go 135, 225, 275, 315. Like that's how I'll build every single time. And then from there, it's like, okay, how do I feel? What am I trying to get to? With the snatch, empty barbell, like I said, I might start at 95 to move a couple reps, 115, 135. And then it's like, okay, how do I feel from there? So if I feel great, maybe I throw 20, I jump from 135 to 155. If I don't feel good, maybe I do an in-between set at 145, right? But just like Dave said, she goes 642. I like to go 531. And so I might do like sets of 5. Let's use the deadlift. Sets of 5 with the barbell, 135, 225, threes at 275, 315, and then singles all the way up from there, right? So that's kind of how I would approach it there. And then for the snatches, it might be something similar, but I do less, touch and go reps or cycling reps necessarily with the snatch. But it might be like, okay, if I hit 95, I hit 115, 135, the first rep didn't feel great. I'm going to maybe hit a second one because I want it to feel good going into the next one. I feel like that's more of how I would approach like a snatch or something like that.
Yeah, totally agree. That's what I do. I would say like for something like deadlift, it's more like straight sets where it's like, okay, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1. And it was like the first 5 sets were like really light. And it was basically just like additional warm up. And then when I actually started building, like basically making sure that those reps or those each of those sets are easy. And easy relative to the weight, right? Like a triple at 315 is not taxing at all. Like for me, if I'm building to a max. So it's like, it's really just preparatory work. And I think that's one of the big things to underscore for people who are more novice. They tend to do basically a working set on the way up to their max. And you can't do that. Like that's what you do in training. That's not what you do for testing. So the big thing there, it's like you want to make it feeling crisp, moving quickly, but then also not be fatiguing because we want to be fresh when you actually get up to your max, which is that's a tricky thing to navigate. So for something like a snatch, I tend to do more like variation, or like a few singles or like a certain variation. For example, I might do like a power snatch, drop, squat snatch, drop, squat snatch if it's like a 95, 135, 155 pound bar. And then, I might keep that power snatch and then just do a squat snatch until 185 or something. And if that feels really crisp, okay, I just drop that power snatch out and now I'm just doing singles the rest of the way on up. Where I might pause in the bottom of my, like my catch position on my snatch just to make sure that like that position's feeling good. So it's more like variations and play off that, but it's all like every time drop, reset, mimicking the exact positions that I want to be in. And then I can just bias different aspects of that lift that I know help me feel good, which to a beginner, I would say is probably something that they want to do less. They want to stick with like just doing squat snatches in the variation that they want to do and just doing singles and then building up and keeping things really controlled. Just to make sure that they're still ingraining that pattern because they're going to be less consistent in how they're able to basically, like their lists are just a little bit less consistent. So,
yeah. And sorry to jump in, but I think that's also super important because for those people listening, if you hear the three of us talk, it's like, this is what I do. Based on how I feel, I might do this. If I feel like this, I'll do this. And so it's like, that's something, if you're a beginner, you don't really have the Rolodex of feel to operate off of. And so it's important to kind of get the principles of it, right? So if you heard Ben talk or Dave talk, it's like, okay, I kind of keep these sets and I stay in this, this is light, this is moderate, and this is where things start feeling heavier. And so that's when I drop to singles, right? And so as a beginner, I would find those principles. And then as you get more reps in, it's like, okay, I can find a complex, right? We'll use a snatch as an example, right? Ben talked about power snatching and to squat snatching. Day talked about doing the same, kind of complex with the bar as she warms up. You'll find what works for you, and then you could build off of feel, right? Like I talked about, if I feel really good, I'll make bigger jumps. If I don't, I'll make smaller ones because at the end of the day, you want the reps, especially in a 1 rep max or a heavy single day. You want to be feeling crisp and snappy and like you're grooving the reps. If you're fighting the reps on the way up, nothing's going to change when you get to those heavier reps, right? So that's kind of like the main principles, I think, if you're a beginner to pull from.
Yeah. So like, that's definitely something that I try to do. And like Dave mentioned earlier, like I do this less for slower lifts because it doesn't really matter as much, frankly, but I want everything clicking and feeling and like I'm hitting the right positions and something that's more technical, like a snatch. So
For sure.
Like, again, if I snatch and my list feels super crisp at 95 and it's like exactly how I want it, okay, great, I'm building. I'll go to 135, okay, that felt great, I'll go to 155. It's like, that didn't feel great. I'm either going to do that again or take a smaller jump and not jump straight to like 185, which typically would be like my next jump. So, again, that's a little bit by feel, but it's certainly like an informed feel. And I think this is probably something that we each do as coaches for athletes. Like, we'll help write specifics around how people are actually testing things. For example, like something that I commonly write, and it's like combination of often like a training piece and like a testing piece. Is like, okay, start at 135, 95 and add 20 or 10 pounds every minute until you fail. And it's like,
right,
okay, you got how many lifts in that were really high quality? Probably. And then at a certain point you failed, and like, it's lower pressure because you've had all these lifts. It's kind of on a tight window. It's not completely unfatigued. So it's like pretty low stress. And yet for someone who maybe doesn't know how to go about like their ideal testing, that really helps get them fairly close to where they would actually be.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that we're now at like 85+% day. Let's just say like you're confident in terms of like your headspace of that you're the strongest you've ever been. What might your jumps be if you're building to a max? Let's say snatch.
For a snatch, it would probably be jumps of like 5 to 7.5%. Nothing crazy. Could from there, just because the snatch, like smaller jumps, right? Versus like another lift, like a deadlift, more of the strength that movements, like you take bigger jumps there. But with that one, just because it's so technical, speed is the like main component, right? If you take too much of a jump, you're going to surprise yourself, ruin all the positions that you just had. So taking that 5 to 7.5% jumps, and I'd probably go closer to the 5% jumps for that. So if I'm at 85%, I'll try 90%. If depending on how that feels, 95%. If that doesn't feel too good, I'd probably go closer to 93%. But then again, you're at that point where things are starting to feel heavy too. So you have to keep in mind, like, all right, I don't want to go do too much of a slow build where it's going to feel kind of crappy, right? So
yeah,
if 95, if 90 feels good, that's where I might even go 97.5 or like closer to that 1 rep max. So I'm not wasting all that energy to get to that 1 rep max. But if that's where it starts feeling kind of crappy, smaller jumps to that goal weight.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like, if you at a certain point you like maybe it's 80% or something. I'm just making that up, but somewhere around that kind of threshold, 85%. It's like it doesn't matter how I feel anymore. I'm committed to like my jumps. Whereas like before that, you could take additional warm up. You can do what you need to do. Like taking more or less building sets. Whereas like at that point, it's like, okay, now from this point, I have like 3 to 5 lifts and something like a snatch that I really am like, I need to get to my goal weight or I'm gonna need to pack it in for the day. And I think that's even more so true in something like a deadlift. So again, if I think personally, if I'm like gonna build to a deadlift max, it's like I'm gonna go like maybe 85%, maybe like 95, maybe it's more like, okay, 87, 94, 97 or 98%, and then it's like I have my decision of like, okay, what's my final weight, because I'm only going to get one more, and it might not even be of a 97 or 98%. It might have been like 95%. Now I'm making my final lift, whatever that is, and that's pretty much it for the day, because like I'm exhausted at that point.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like for something like, so like let's contrast that, like snatch versus deadlift. Like, what do your attempts look like?
My attempts, that's where I will have more steady, like 5% jumps, 7.5% jumps, and I don't really deviate from there, just because like bar speed is really not the priority, but getting the weight up. So if it's still moving slow, but I'm still getting it up in good positions, forms not break it down and all that, I'll stay with those dedicated percentages versus kind of altering it with the snatch, where the snatch is like I have a range that I want to play with, where deadlift or one of those slower strength movements, I kind of like stay with it. If I get it up and it looks good and it feels good, then we'll take a 5% jump. But if I'm at 85%, I'll probably do one at 90 and then go for like that 98, 100% from there. It's not too fatiguing to the CNS, I feel like, for me personally, than a snatch. For a snatch, like it's just
Flex
so
from
much.
day, deadlift super easy.
Yeah, right. No, not by any means, but for me, I just feel like that speed, that like I know for me, I'm not much of a power athlete, but more of a like strength. I'm better at slow strength versus that that speed strength. So for me, like the deadlifts, like I could stay to those dedicated jumps and feel pretty good versus the snatches, like I'll know if I'm gonna hit it or not.
Yeah.
Based on the speed, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of have that feeling too, though, for almost any lift. Like almost regardless of what it is, it's like at a certain point, it's like I kind of feel like I have it today or I kind of don't. And like sometimes that deceives you, but no, it's pretty rare at this point. And I think maybe it happens more as a beginner.
Yeah, I feel like I've been deceived going into the session. Like, I don't know today. And then you get moving. Or like, I feel great today. And then but it's like, and then you get moving and it's like, what the heck? But I think, I think you're right. It's like when you get into the middle of the sets, like you kind of know if things feel good or if they don't.
Yeah.
I know with like the teams that I work with, just because they have so much variability in their sports training and then just being college kids and all that stuff, like life happens that when we have like a week where we're trying to get our like heavy sets, like 1 rep max or whatever, I usually repeat the workout 2 weeks. So I give them like an option because like so many of them are like, oh, I had an exam, didn't sleep, all these like stressors. So it's like they're probably not going to have it today. So like I'll give them the option. Like you could build to a heavy set, see how you feel. If that 1 rep is there, go for it. If not, we're going to repeat it next week. So for like something like that, like, yeah, some days you just have it, some days you just don't. So I know in like a team setting with like athletes who have so much stuff going on in life, I like to give the option of like 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is where we can probably start throwing in our 2 cents on like our pet things that we really like to do. Like one of my most favorite formats is like one, like I said before, like a short lifting window. Like for a clean jerk, it's probably going to be more like every 2 minutes. But every 2 minutes, and you're building by a small chunk, and you're just like a bunch of reps. And again, for a CrossFit athlete, that's typically not as draining as someone like a Olympic weightlifter who is just going to have like way more neurologically tuned to be for strength and power. That's going to be more draining for somebody like that. But like for my CrossFit athletes, it's way easier to have like repeat ability like that. And then like for them specifically, I think it's really helpful a lot of the time to like get out of their own head if they can do something that is under a lot of pressure in terms of like time constraint, where they don't have time to sit here and look at their barbell and think about how they could miss 6 different ways before they actually go to make the attempt. Like if you're an Olympic weightlifter, like that's something you have to deal with since you're going to have minutes in between your attempts. If you're a CrossFit athlete, that is pretty rare that actually happens unless you're at like a games or a high level event where you're going to have multiple, opportunities to lift, and basically someone else is going in between there. So for my CrossFit athletes, I really like giving them like, okay, here's a 15-minute window. We actually did this at camp the other day. It was 963 high burpee box jump over and a shoulder run, and we had a 20-minute clock. And after that, it was one RM jerk from the rack, and it was like nobody was dealing with any amount of fatigue that was going to impact them in a negative way at the end of that window. But yet it was like just enough pressure where they weren't thinking about like, oh, this is an unfatigued 1 RM test. It was like, this is a Metcon into a lift, but guess what? You're actually going to be really fresh and like have a really good opportunity to be at your best. So I've done that with a lot of different people. Here's like a quick burner Metcon that's going to get you tired, and it's going to put a little bit of pressure on you. It's basically just going to, again, almost give you an excuse if you don't do well. Like, oh, it was in a Metcon, I was on a short time clock. Like, okay, 15 minutes to build to a heavy back squat double. It's like, man, you could hit 90% and that could be just fine, or you could go 102% and like you're like, holy smokes, I had a great day. And it's like, as a coach, it's like it's a win-win because like they've had an opportunity to get good training in. If they have a great day, it's going to be a win, and like, you're gonna look like a genius. And if they have an average okay day where they don't PR their lifts, it's like no stress. It's like didn't have like 1 RM test and like next to it, they're not freaking out that they didn't hit their best.
Yeah, CrossFitters are so friggin' weird. Because it's like with that, in that format, I found it's like your whole mental capacity is like, how much time is left? What weight should I put on the bar? Based on that, what should I do? You're not left thinking about, because if you're going to be in that scenario as a coach, right? I just want my athlete to move, right? I don't want you to be thinking about, is my body positioned here? Am I doing this? Am I doing this? Because theoretically, we might have done 8 to 12 weeks of that stuff where that's what I wanted you thinking about that stuff, right? But if your brain is in so many different positional things, and not that it shouldn't be focusing on certain positions, so hopefully this isn't coming across the wrong way, but when it comes to like time to perform, as an athlete, you have to just let your body perform. And I found that like you were saying, Ben, sometimes in just the broad, like open canvas, hit a 1 rep max for the day. like crossfitters can be left like thinking way too much because there's too much dead time. Whereas it might take them the same amount of time to find that 1 rep max. Let's call it 12 minutes, right? But because you did 6 minutes of work before and they're tired and the clock is running, it's like they're not thinking about that. They're just like, okay, I got to put 135 on the bar. Okay, I got to put this on the bar. Oh, okay, cool. I have more time left than I thought. Maybe I do this in between. They're almost thinking strategically as opposed to being so in their head on the position that they don't let their body be athletic. So yeah, we're weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And 9 out of 10 times, sorry, Dale, I'll let you go in 1 second. 9 out of 10 times, though, it's like that's how you're being tested in the sport. All right, go ahead.
Exactly. Dave. No, and Day, you're probably about to jump in, and I'll let you talk on what you're going to say. But like, you coach regular athletes. Like, that's probably not the best term to use. You coach college athletes, and so it's like it's the same thing goes for them. Like you're not going to be coaching a volleyball player, and then you get out on the floor and they're going to play volleyball and they're thinking about where their hands are and if they're in the right position. No, they just go hit the ball because that's what they've been practicing.
Right. And I don't know, like, if you guys are seeing this from any of the athletes you coach, but like, I know I work with, I've seen it a few times where like, if you give them just that blank canvas that you were talking about, like hit a 2 rep, 1 rep, whatever, like they'll start using that time, like they'll film it, look at every little position, zoom into the video. They'll be like, oh, I got to go to the bathroom, like out of nowhere. And it's just like, oh, I'll take an extra minute rest. I need that extra minute rest. And it's like, you're fine. Your heart rate is literally like 90 right now. You're more than primed to do this. So, I like the approach that you were just mentioning, because I do think it helps a lot with people, especially people who battle with like the mental side of it, right? Like they're like, oh, I haven't hit this weight yet. Oh, like, and then they'll just overthink it. And they get like, they're doing the snatch and they get up to here and they're like, nope. And then they just drop the bar. It's kind of like, just get them something where they're just so they get fatigued or whatever, and just have them rotate through and they'll be fine.
Yeah.
So Dave, I'm going to have you, if you're going to walk out into your garage and you're going to build to a max snatch.
Which, by the way, would be at 3:30 in the morning because she's a freak.
Yeah, well, I went to bed at like 6:30 p.m. last night, so.
Got my 8 hours up at 2:30. So if you're gonna walk out there and build up to a snatch, are you gonna like have what kind of a format are you gonna use for yourself? Are you gonna use the blank canvas approach because you're super savvy in like lifting and you like know what you're doing and you're not gonna freak out about that, or like how do you organize that if you're gonna go walk out in your garage and do that?
Yeah, with a snatch specifically, I put myself on the clock. So I'll do like either an EMOM for the first few sets where they're lighter, like just the empty barbell, that type of stuff. And I'll transition to every 2 minutes or every 2:30 after that. Because for me, like not confident in the snatch, like I know once I see a certain weight, the mental side comes into it before then. So that's where I have to put myself on the clock. So I just stayed like dedicated to doing that.
Yep. I do the same thing. Like I did this in class the other day and I just used it because I personally like the format. It was like every 30 seconds for like 8 lifts, EMOM for 6 lifts, and then like every 2 minutes for like 4 lifts. And basically everyone's building to a max, but it didn't look that way because it was just like all this interval work, but it was only one snatch for all of those. And that's like personally how I would like to do it. Like 2 to maybe 2.5 minutes for something like a snatch. If I'm doing clean jerks, definitely at least 2 minutes, probably more like 2 to 3. And then deadlifts could probably stand around, and realistically, I'm probably only going to do singles or doubles. So I'll probably still only take like maybe 3 to 4 minutes. But that would be like on the longer end, like squats and back squats and deadlifts. I'm probably going to take the most time, but still it's not going to be like powerlifter type sets where I'm resting 5 to 7 minutes in between. It's going to be like realistically like 3 to 4 minutes. I'm starting to antsy. I'm just going to want to go. So I'll just go.
I was just about to say, we're doing in my opinion, a really good job of prepping people for a 1 rep max, but can we get to one of my bugaboos, which is when someone has a 3 or 5 rep max? And
yeah, so let's please talk about this.
because this really bothers me. All right. And And listen, I'm not taking any shots at anyone specifically, but as we all know, sometimes you build to a rep max, right? Commonly, you'll see a 2 or 3, a 5. And I've seen this in class. Again, no shots at anyone specific. But we cannot, as a society, at a 5 rep max, only do sets of 5 building to this 5 rep max. I won't have it. I won't let it happen. And so we need to clarify how we strategize how to do this.
Is that it? You're just going to leave it at that?
No, I was going to wait for one of you to start.
All right, I will start. So, yeah, I mean, I think obviously like a 5 rep max is a good example. I think a 10 rep max is even exaggerated even more. Like,
Sure.
Okay, let's say we have 10 rep max front squats. And that's like, okay, 10 rep max for the day. And you're going to do 10 reps at each of your 5 to 7 building sets. You've done like 80 front squats. And now you're asking yourself to do like, yeah, like be at your best when you're absolutely trash from the amount of volume you've done. Like when you put it that way, it sounds completely ridiculous. So what's a better strategy for doing that? It's like, okay, you can get up to the weight that you want to do without being super tired. That makes more sense. Mm-hmm. Okay, how might you do that? Okay, maybe I do 3 to 4 reps at my target, each of like my target jumps until I'm at my 10 rep max weight. And then I make my 10 rep max attempt. And if I don't get it, that's probably it for the day. Like I'm probably done. I don't know. That's my mindset.
I think I think for me, the target weight for a rep max is even more important than your target or thought weight for a 1 rep max. And the reason why I say that is because everyone knows kind of what their 1 rep max is, right? And you have there's only so many ways you can build to that. However, if I have, let's use Ben's example of a 10 rep max, you got to go into it with an idea of like, this is kind of where I think I'm going to be for today. Because if you're way off, or if you're just willy-nilly going about it, you're either going to do 1,000,001 reps, which Ben already said we do not recommend. And I'll just use a 5 rep because I feel like from a class perspective, that's more applicable, is like, okay, I would build to my 5 rep at, okay, hey, maybe my first 2, like I might do 5 reps with the barbell, 5 reps at 135. And then it's like, okay, after that, I might do sets of 3 for 2 or 3 sets, and then just singles, simply feeling the weight, building to the weight I want to hit for that set of 5. But if I have no idea what I'm going to hit for my set of 5, I could get into a pickle where I'm like, I think that I could do 5 for this. And you do 2.5, and now you're shot. And there's no chance of you actually hitting a 5 rep max for the day. So I think it's super important, in my opinion, if I had to power rank them, even more important to have an idea when you're heading into a rep max than a 1 rep max.
Yeah. And like with that, if like let's say you're coaching a class or whatever, and you're trying to get them to like a 5 rep, 10 rep max, whatever rep max, I think that's where it's from. Like you should be familiar with like the rep max chart and know what percentage goes with that. So because like you mentioned, most people know their 1 rep max. So, or have an estimation of that. So if like you're coaching and you're like, hey, we're building to a 10 rep max today, just so you know, that's approximately like 75% of your 1 rep max. So like somewhere hover around there as your goal. So you have some type of idea, because a lot of times people have no idea, like you mentioned, and that's where they'll just go absolutely nuts and either inflate that number way too high.
I think that's a great point, Day, to pull out that chart, say, hey, based on this chart, this is probably the percentage around here, give or take, you're going to be. So if you don't have a previous 10 rep, 5 rep max, shoot for around this range. But then also, there's nothing wrong with like aborting the mission midway through, right? So let's say I'm doing a 10 rep max and I'm at rep 5, and it is like I'm grinding out rep 5. Chances are you're not going to get the next 5 reps. So maybe you rack the weight, take some weight off, so you actually get a rep max for the day. But vice versa is actually pretty awesome. When you're doing, let's say, a 5 or 10 rep max and you're halfway through and you're like, this is so easy. Rack the weight and let's throw another 5 to 10, 20 on, and let's take a rest and let it ride a second time. You know, it's like, that's actually a lot of fun when you're like, all right, I got a 5 rep max. You're all geeked up. You hit rep 2. or rep 3 and you're like, oh my gosh, this is moving so friggin' fast. Like,
Yeah.
just put the bar down. Let's push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. Yeah, you just kind of have to be okay calling an audible halfway through a set.
Mm-hmm.
For better or for worse, but hopefully for better. And then one thing that we didn't talk about that I think we should is like what I see a lot of times in terms of like mistakes of people doing this is if we're just going back to like a 1 rep max, and again, sort of like a multiple rep max, you're just sort of SOL. If you overshoot the load way too much and like now you're just spent, it's like, well, you're just probably not going to hit what you can hit for the day. But I would also say that's often true too. If you try to do that with like a deadlift or something, you just pull 20 pounds heavier than you actually can. And it's like, oh, I overshot what I thought I could do. And now I have to backpedal and try to go up again. You're much better off like being slightly conservative, even if it means that you have to hit another rep. At a certain point, like if you're someone who's just that finely tuned, where if you do another rep at a really high percentage, you're just not going to match it. That's where you have to go 95% and then make the decision if you're going 102 or just calling it for the day.
For sure. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think, you know, you have to be willing, because that's a lot of times where injuries happen, right? Is when you overshoot it or whatever the case is, and you don't get it. And instead of saying, all right, I'm spent for the day, like not where I want to be, but live to fight another day type deal, you go down maybe a couple percent and then you try to do it again, you're shot. Like you took your chance and you blew it. So move on.
Yeah.
But please, for the love of God, everyone in the sound of my voice, stop doing sets of 5 all the way up to your 5 rep max. Please, I beg of you.
Well, I think we'll probably leave it at that.
Perfect.
So I think maybe it makes sense for us to do a sequel in this episode. So maybe we'll come back and do a more of a look at body weight versus like weightlifting, like higher rep maxes again. So for example, if it's a super strong dude like Chris and he's going to do a 315 deadlift rep max and he's going to get 60 reps, what should that look like? Versus if he's doing his handstand push-up rep max and he's going to do 80 reps, what should that look like?
Yeah, totally. Both of those are 100% true.
But because obviously that'll be very different than the 1 to 5 kind of rep range that we talked about today. So again, if you got questions, reach out to us. Ben, Day, Chris at swarefitness.com. Those are our emails. We'll see you next time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.